And they felt, again, if they went in there, that their safety was very much at risk, and in their mind they had no choice but to take this action.
Selma's top cop defends the action of one of his officers who shot and killed 5 caged dogs inside the city's animal shelter. Good evening, I'm Ashley Ritchie.
And I'm Monty Torres. Thank you for joining us. The shooting took place last week at Selma's animal shelter. Police say the dogs were so vicious that they would not be surprised if they had been used for fighting. But volunteers at the shelter say other options should have been taken. It's a story you'll only see here on KMPH News. Reporter Eric Rosales spoke with volunteers who say the dogs were shot and killed simply to save time and money. So, Eric, what does the chief have to say about all this?
Well, Monty, Selma's police chief says having one of his officers shoot and kill 5 caged dogs is not an ideal situation by no means, but he says the dogs were so vicious that they'd attack the officer when he attempted to enter the cage and move them. The chief even says the couple who dropped them off claimed that they found the dogs, but they didn't want them anymore because the dogs even turned on them. Last Friday, volunteers at the Selma Animal Shelter say they were horrified when they heard the news that a Selma police sergeant took out his department-issued gun and shot and killed 5 caged pit bulls.
A couple were described as appearing like dogs on steroids. Possibility even came out as, were they trained to be aggressive?
Selma Police Chief Myron Dick admits it happened, but says that's not the whole story.
We had the dogs evaluated,
And what was
their determination was these dogs are too aggressive to be adopted out to anybody.
Selma's police chief says the last thing he wants his officers to do is ever put down a dog. He did call a local veterinarian to come down to the shelter to euthanize the dogs, but when the vet couldn't, his officers were going to take the dogs to the veterinarian office. But he says when his officers started entering the gate to get into the cage where the dogs were held, that's when the dogs attacked.
As soon as they went to open the gate, the dogs rushed the gate, and they felt that if they opened it up, they would be bitten at minimum and could be knocked down and mauled.
The chief says the officer feared for his life and even mentioned to him the recent mauling of a Selma man who was found dead on a woman's property last month. Even so, the chief says steps are being made to prevent something like this from ever happening again. He also says the record of the Selma Animal Shelter speaks for itself. Last year, out of the more than 300 dogs taken into the shelter, only 6 were euthanized due to illness or aggressiveness. But it's important to note that the issue with the volunteers was not that the dogs were euthanized, but it was how it was done. Therefore, this evening, volunteers at the shelter who were angry about the shooting met with the chief. They tell KMPH News that the police department now plans to implement other options, like first maybe tranquilizing or using sedatives for aggressive dogs that need to be put down. Monty, this way they can be euthanized by a veterinarian with no problem.
Eric, did the chief indicate that the officer who actually shot the dogs would face any kind of repercussions?
No, as far as we know, no disciplinary action has been brought against the police officer. The chief says that the officer did everything he could. He was just protecting himself and the people there at the shelter.
All right, thank you, Eric. And shelter volunteers also say the chief assured them that no dogs at the shelter would ever be shot by an officer again unless it was a life or death situation.